Hey, my name is Deanna Levy, and I'm a journalist who hosts and produces a podcast called Generation Cult. On each show, I interview a person who was raised in an isolated, authoritarian, high demand group, also known as a cult. And side note, I also grew up in one myself. Chances are you've never even heard of some of these organizations, but others we discuss have made some serious headlines over the years. Either way, these episodes focus on the stories of people who didn't choose to join. They were either born into or brought into these groups by parents or guardians as a child. Many of them grew up isolated from mainstream society and had a lot of catching up to do when they finally left their groups. On the podcast, we discuss their experiences in the cult, but most importantly, we covered their journeys out and the lives they built after the cult. Some of these stories are really disturbing, while others deal with more subtle forms of coercion and control. Please join me every 2 weeks for a new episode of Generation Cult, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to this week's mini-series. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast, and today we have something new. Forensic psychiatrist Shaham Das, host of the Psych for Sore Minds YouTube channel, sat down with me a few months ago to explore the topic of narcissism and cult leaders. During our discussion, Dr. Das offered details on 5 different types of narcissists and how they may present. 1. The overt narcissist. The most obvious. They are grandiose and tend to overestimate their own abilities and intelligence. They have few insecurities and therefore rarely experience negative cognitions like sadness or loneliness. Number 2. The covert narcissist. Vulnerable and clandestine. Suck pity out of their prey with frequent expressions of low self-esteem, often experiencing anxiety, depression, and shame, and crave pity for these feelings. Number 3. The antagonistic narcissist. Arrogance, rivalry, and competition, constantly competing with others but in a boasting, belittling, and nasty manner that pushes people away, apart from other antagonistic narcissists. Number 4. Communal narcissism. Ostensibly altruistic, but in reality, love being morally outraged. They react strongly to injustice, but if you scratch past the surface, it's for attention rather than actual, genuine compassion. They may quickly dump the victims to move on to the next cause, as it's more popular. And number 5, the malignant narcissist. Extreme form of overt narcissism, but with extra vindictiveness, paranoia, and evil. They will make threats or act violently. They not only crave attention, but get pleasure in seeing other people suffer. These are bad dudes. I will put a link in Shaham's channel in the episode description, A Psych for Sore Minds. The subject of narcissism is going to be the main focus for today's installment as I chat with Brandon Chadwick, host of the Narcissist Apocalypse podcast, a show not unlike this one, a long-format interview-based show where Brandon unpacks the details of narcissistic abuse alongside those who have survived it. If you enjoy this discussion, please consider checking out Brandon's podcast. I'll pop a link to this in the episode description. For early access to full-length, ad-free episodes, you can sign up to my Patreon at patreon.com/thecultvault. And thank you to Kitty Sue for the 5-star review this week. Every piece of feedback helps, and each review and rating pushes the podcast further into the public realm. And now, here is Brandon. So hello, Brandon, and welcome to the show. I'm looking forward to having this discussion today with a fellow podcaster and talking to you about your processes as a content creator and the work that you do. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Well, my name is Brandon Chadwick. I am the host of Narcissist Apocalypse. And Narcissist Apocalypse is pretty much a raw, unfiltered podcast that started off interviewing people that were victims of specifically narcissistic abuse. And then I realized along the way that it was domestic violence as a whole, like dysfunctional families, childhood abuse, and that abuse comes in all different types of forms that you really didn't realize before. And then there's the word narcissist, which is something that has so many different meanings now. And the show in itself, what I think is crazy about the show is that this was never my intention to create the show. And I had a website, and the website was a phobia website, and it was doing, whatever type of business, not the greatest business. And I had a lot of mental health blogs on there, and one of them was called How to Survive the Narcissist Apocalypse, which I wrote, and it was pretty cathartic to write it. It was fictional, but I used memories from my dysfunction growing up to have some fuel for it. But I like to kind of write it, and what I was writing was really absurd, or at least I thought it was absurd. And then one day Google pressed a button and I lost all the traffic because it was called a medic update. And it considered my site fake news because I was creating these phobias sites and platforms, but I wasn't a doctor. So I was devastated. And I said, what's the best thing I was doing of all of my blogs? Because I had one that was a CPTSD blog that was called Canada Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. So it was like all done on Canadian postcards. So I had like these like really kitschy kind of blogs. And I used like the How to Survive the Narcissist Apocalypse one was my best one. So I was like, okay, finish this as a book. So I kept going. And I got to a point where I was at like the editing stage of this mess, which was kind of funny, but there's still like a mess. And I was like, everyone's doing a podcast, so that will be my audience for this, but I'll be the character from my book. And, writing humor is different than doing it live. And I'm not trained at being an improv actor in any sort of way. So it really was not going well doing it. And episode 3, which is now episode 1, my friend was coming in from out of town, and I asked her to help me. And she was going to be at her boyfriend's parents' house, and they were out of town. So I went over and I brought all my equipment, and I just figure it out, like vibe off me somehow. And we're going, and it was really an odd first episode if anyone ever listens to it. And like, that's why it's so weird. And then eventually I asked her, I noticed something was wrong. And I broke into some serious questions. I kind of went out of character. I tried to stay in character, but it was not easy. And, we started to discuss what was going on with her life and the person that used to be in their life. And after that episode, I put it out, not thinking anything of it, that this was like a weird, serious / bad humor. And 4 weeks later, I had one listener to the show. One person listened, and they emailed me and they said, don't do the comedy stuff, just do those interviews. So I found someone on Reddit. It took me a while. And this person came from dysfunction. And I think like 6 weeks later, we recorded and put it out. And that was cathartic because the person was we didn't have the same upbringing, but I could have finished his sentences. We were the exact same. And I put that out. And then like 3 weeks later, someone new emailed me and said, put more of those interviews out. That helped me. So I changed my old website, Instagram, to the new name. At the time, it was called How to Survive the Narcissist Apocalypse. And I called myself, my character's name was Chad. So I called myself Chad the Impaler. Which was a very odd thing to hear on a domestic violence show, but eventually we fixed that because that just was very, very odd, and probably scared a lot of people away. But I put out a thing on my Instagram at that point, and I said that, hey, this is what we're doing now. This is what I'm doing now. Does anyone want to be a guest? And then I just started getting emails, and then it just started to go. And that's kind of how it was born. And it was born out of, it just was not the intention of everything. And I think that's what to me is amazing, that it is just something kind of happened, and I didn't think about like money or this is going to be my job or anything like that. It was just, to me, like when the internet started for me in like the 90s, I loved talking to people who lived on the other side of the planet. And I thought it was the coolest thing in the world that you could connect with someone. And it was like, to me, that was the most amazing. It's taken for granted now. And doing this with the show and connecting with someone, but actually on a really deep level, who is a stranger, and helping them now, like the process of how the show has changed from not knowing what I was doing to really being a facilitator of helping people tell their story, in letting them tell their story their way and staying out of the way, but beforehand facilitating the best way to tell it, the best way to attack it, and the most effective way for people to listen to them the whole way through without turning it off, and being effective to a cathartic experience for themselves, but also to educate other people. And if you told me 4 years ago that I would create a show where I would talk to people and it educated people at the same time, I would have called you like crazy. Is doesn't do it justice at all what I would have called you. It just wasn't on my mind. I was trying to write a funny book, you know. This just wasn't a plan. And that's what I think, to me, it's like Woodstock happened one day, you know, it was a festival, and then all of a sudden craziness ensued and it became this thing. And I always thought about those things. Well, those things never happened to me. And then one day it did. And it did. And it was pretty amazing.
I love that, Brandon. I think that's amazing. And I hear so much of my own story in what you've said in regards to how the show started and how one thing changed the entire trajectory that your show was on, and how you're now in a position where you get to have these incredible conversations with wonderfully brave individuals who come forward to share their stories, which helps other people that listen to the show. How people find our shows and listen and email in and all of those things, I think it's absolutely incredible. So it's really quite powerful for me to sit here and hear you explain the work that you're doing and the impact that it's had on you and other people as well. I think that's incredibly significant. So I want to say personally, thank you for being a person that offers other people a chance to tell their stories.
Well, thank you. Like I always I wanted to be, I'm a storyteller as is, and to help other people, because you're dealing with people. Not everyone is a natural storyteller. Not everyone can tell a story. And when you're talking with people who've been in abusive situations, with people who are in cults, in those situations, not everyone is able to explain what happened to them. They're not able to explain a lot of the times the story effectively for other people to understand what they were dealing with. And a big thing to me is your emotions and your feelings. People don't know how to ask for help sometimes because they can't really describe their feelings. They don't know what their feelings are, especially with situations that have occurred. A lot of the time they might say, I was, that made me sad, or I was scared. But when you're trying to translate that to someone will be like, oh, I hear that you were sad. I hear that you're scared. But if someone can for 10 minutes tell me what scared is, and go down a hole of how they were feeling and what that was, and really go and describe it in so many ways, that gives a vocabulary to that person who's trapped in a cult, in a family, in a relationship, in a way where they understand themselves more. It creates movement to either leave a situation or never go back to a situation. And then it can translate to other people who don't understand what they've been through. They can talk to those people, and those people can then give them support, because when someone hears the depths of despair that you're in the real depths, that person's not going to walk away. They're going to look at you and they're going to try and hold your hand and be like, okay, I get it. I get it. And if they don't do that, then they're a jerk. But if you're able to really get to that level, you're connecting with people. And it's a lot of time I say a story is a story is a story is a story. But if you can connect, and you can connect more with your feelings, because though everyone's story can be different, but your feelings will always be the same. And when you can connect with someone about those things, then you're telling those things and you're helping people just maneuver as a whole.
Something that you do very well with your work is approach the subject very sensitively and with compassion. And you're very careful to protect the identities of the guests that you have on your show and personal information that might make the guest identifiable to the audience. So you'll take out things like names, siblings' names, places where individuals have grown up. Is this something that you've always done, or something that you've learned over time?
I had to learn, and it was slow, but there have been instances where that was it got us in trouble. And when there's identifiers that are just too identifying, um, it's risky. And then I was like, why are we putting people at risk? Even if they want, some people want to use the real name. And I'm like, you think that's a good idea, but you might think like 2 minutes after the show came out that like you start to get scared. It puts people at ease. Like, even though they might not think that they might have a stress reaction to it, that's there. And then there's one specific episode we re-released it recently, where it was really the first big instance of a blowback. And we ask people, if they do share it, we like try not to share it, because that's not the point of the show. The show is to like help others over you. But some people will share it still. And you have to be careful with who you share it with. So we had someone who shared it with someone that they really thought they could trust, and they only wanted that person's empathy. And then that person played it for someone, and then that someone played it for the people that the show was about. And we had real names. And at that point, that was over right there. So it took 4 years, but I re-released that episode. And that was a long time coming to do that, because the person didn't do anything wrong. You just trusted the person that they thought they could trust. But since then, if you can take out, I say, like, if you want to keep in places, let's just call the places different places. If you live in New York, now you live in Florida. Sometimes you might hear that someone has a bunch of siblings and they might only really have one. So we try to kind of play with that. So it's confusing for people to be like, I hear that voice, but like, the family doesn't sound the same. Occasionally we've flipped it that the person is a different sex. We've gone that far. Voice changers, the technology isn't there to use a voice changer. But we do our best to protect everyone, because that's the most important thing. And even if you think that you don't want that, I still think it's in your best interest to be as safe as possible. But I am an Enneagram type 6, where I think of security all the time and Murphy's Law. So that's my go-to.
In the episode that you're referencing, I have listened to that recently, and I noticed that although there isn't a voice changer, there is voice modification on that episode. So is that something that you use quite regularly as well?
This was the first time I used the attempt at voice modification. To me, the sound was not the best for the episode because it had that kind of going on. There was weird pops, but I thought, okay, I'm going to put it out, but I'm going to be as safe as possible as putting out. I mean, we used a different, like the sex of the name is not the sex of the person in the show. We did a lot of things
I think it
in that
sounded
one.
great. Maybe because you know what the original sounds
Just
like,
yeah.
you can compare it. But I have used voice modification myself for guests and pseudonyms, and we've taken out identifying details in episodes as well. But sometimes all of that stuff stays in. So I think it really is for my podcast on preference. But I think what you're saying there is incredibly important about protecting the individuals that are coming forward to speak on your show. But it's not just survivor interviews that you do, or those that have been victimized in abusive situations. You do a lot of other things. I was going through your YouTube channel, and there's several different playlists that you can go and look at, and there's some really interesting material. So I wondered if you could just tell the listeners what else they might find if they head over.
So specifically for YouTube, and I guess a little bit on our bonus episodes, we have some pop culture stuff on there, and breaking down Twilight as a very unhealthy relationship. Because technically it's a story of a 105-year-old man, Edward Cullen, who is dating or wants to date a 16-year-old girl at the time, or 16 or 17-year-old girl. And right off the bat, that is, listen, I know how smart I was when I was 16, how dumb I was when I was 19, how dumb I was when I was 25, how dumb I was for a long time. I still am dumb. But, someone who's 105 years old and has that life experience is going to be able to manipulate you in any way. But the biggest thing for me about that relationship would have been that he's always the one causing the problem and then fixing the problem. So he's causing this issue and then fixing it. So he's doing this thing where he's becoming the hero of the things that he's kind of creating. Just leave the girl alone. That's the safest thing to do. You're smart enough to know. So we've done Twilight. 50 Shades of Grey was just phenomenal to do because it's such a ridiculous movie. And that's fan fiction of Twilight, so it makes sense. We've done one on Ross Geller from Friends, because Ross Geller is a vulnerable victim playing narcissist, where he's not someone who technically is, what you think, grandiose and all those things. He's always playing the victim, but he does think he's smarter than everyone else. Monica is the scapegoat to his golden child in the family. He's only always thinking about himself. Even when his wife is giving birth, he's not even thinking about his child. He's complaining about like his wife's girlfriend and their dynamic on the day that his child's about to be born. He really only thinks about like him, and he's always caught in his own victimhood. And even with Rachel and whatever that relationship, you think of that, before he ever got together with her in high school, because he is a black and white thinker, he had because Rachel wouldn't pay attention to him, he started the I Hate Rachel Club. So he has this vindictiveness in him. Everything on the show is, most characters on sitcoms are sarcastic, but it's sarcasm, which is a very narcissistic form of humor. It's like taking a jab at you. And he does just generally think that he's better than everyone if you look at him. So Friends we did. Recently, we did Jennifer's Body as well, where we really got into, specifically with that one, just, from the abuse standpoint and society and women and being a woman's empowerment movie, and how the subtext of everything. And even though it was a demon movie, we really got into the nitty gritty of that and really broke it down. And that was a lot of fun to do. those videos are just fun to do, and to just take anything and really be able to break it down. And we're going to try and make as many of those now as possible. Not technically for you, for me. And then I hope other people enjoy it, because when you're talking with people with trauma all the time, you want to still do your work and have the work be part of what you're doing, but you still need to have fun. So that's kind of me having fun, but still staying on track, and discussing things.
It's really important to practice self-care, and it might be that is what your version of self-care looks like, in terms of continuing your own education, but also taking a step back from. Someone said marinating in other people's trauma causes you to manifest your own responses physically, psychologically. I think that was Ken Garrett, the author, who said that to me in an interview a few weeks back with us. So if your self-care looks like you putting your knowledge into pop culture and having fun with it, but still learning at the same time, I think that sounds great.
Yeah, it's, for me, when you're doing this all the time, you are like, I see myself as, I'm facilitating and I'm helping tell a story. A lot of people, people will be like, well, you don't really talk that much on your podcast. We barely hear you. Like, I'll come in when I need to. And so it's odd that way, where I'm more of like an investigator, I say. I'm helping someone investigate their story and unearth things. So I listen in a different way sometimes. I'm being compassionate, and it's not a show that's trauma informed per se, in the sense of, if you're telling your story on here, you're going to have to go through it, and you're going to be hitting these things. And there's no way around that, really, because you're trying to help other people. So it's a difficult kind of thing. But when it comes to me and my role and how I take on those things, sometimes you just need to take your step back and take a break. And there is one episode where I got too emotionally involved, and I don't think I respected the person's story fully as I should. And it was one where they were the golden child of a family, and they had abuse as well, but their sibling also was the scapegoat and got it in a different way. And they weren't the greatest to them, but they were also abused at the same time. And I got too emotionally involved, and I started feeling so bad for the sibling, and I wasn't taking care of the person telling me the story as I should. But I started to get too into it. So I was like, oh, you got to start taking your step back from where you are in this process, because that wasn't good for that person. And I learned from that mistake right there. I was like, I knew it when it happened, and I had to kind of move backwards, but it's hard to do that, to not get too involved, but still be compassionate at the same time. And keeping yourself safe while doing it.
I think it's also important to note that if somebody can say that they have made a mistake and that they need to change their approach or their way of thinking, or recognize that there is a line that shouldn't be crossed, and when perhaps we've crossed it, I think that says a lot about how a host or an interviewer or a journalist, or an investigator is willing to learn and grow by taking on board those things, we were talking about this before we hit record, taking on negative feedback, taking on constructive criticism, and being able to say, okay, I can see exactly what this person is trying to say, and I will take that information on board, and I will make the correct modifications to my approach, my style, my compassion. And I think that it's really important to note that you are doing that as a host. Instead of just saying, that, oh, I got too emotionally involved and I needed to take a step back. Not a lot of people will recognize that at times. So I think that there is some kudos to be given there for individuals that can do that.
Well, thank you. I want to make the best show I can. You want to make the best show you can. And we can only make the best show when we're constantly changing and we're constantly improving and getting better and figuring out what, the people who are listening to the show, what do they need? What do they want to hear? What can make their life better? And how can is what is being asked of me reasonable? Is it being really nitpicky? Is it a personal preference for someone? Or is it something that if someone's going to critique what you're doing, is it something where you're like, okay, that is a good point. I will do that. Because you get so many different people's opinions of what they think you should do. And some things are not helpful. Some things are just, get your own show. If that's what you want to do. It's not what I want to do. I didn't think that was a problem. Why are you giving me a complex? But then you have people that are like really genuinely like, this was it. You could do that a little bit better. I'm like, and you kind of sit there and you think like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I think I can do that. Because you want the show to grow, and you want, we're independent, and we're these small little engines that kept on going, and people who are in these communities find us and they listen to our shows, and we help them, and they learn, and they get validated by everything that they're hearing. And the more we can be part of that process and improve that process, the better. And then one day you're a radio host. And you never intended it to happen.
One day you have a whole team of people helping you bring all of your biggest ideas to fruition. And isn't that the dream?
Yeah, well, someone said to me a long time ago that what does your ego want out of this? And it was a really uncomfortable question for me. I'm like, well, when I started, I didn't have an idea of what I wanted. I just wanted it to keep going. And I wanted it to grow. And I wanted it to work. And I think that's what all I said was like, I just want this to work. I didn't know what that meant. And then within wanting this to work, figuring out like who I am and what that means to me and what is my role. And when I looked, because I didn't understand what I was doing for a very long time. Like I was doing it, but I didn't understand it. I don't know if anyone can understand what I just said, but it's a very difficult kind of thing to just pick up a microphone one day, talk into it. People start listening and emailing you, and people are saying you're changing their lives. And you're still like, okay, sure. Yeah. But a long, long, long time ago, and I say a long time ago, probably about 14 years ago, I went to a pre-intervention, and there was a psychologist in the room, and there was a therapist in the room, no, a social worker and a psychologist and a bunch of people. And in the world of domestic violence, when like a police officer shows up to the door, a lot of times the person who called the police is going to feel guilty, and they're going to say, oh, no, nothing's going on here. Nothing's going on. Or they sugarcoat what's going on. So I grew up feeling like I didn't kind of have a voice. I was always voicing about this one specific issue that was going on. And after a while, you don't even talk any about it anymore because no one's listening. And in this pre-intervention, this psychologist looks at me and goes, you haven't spoken. All of these people are lying. You know the truth. You tell me the truth. So I said, okay, I'll tell a story. So I told a story. And then one person in the room said, how come you never told us that before? And then I said, okay, I'll tell another one. And then they put up their hands in front of their face and said, I don't want to know. And then I said, and this is why we're here today. So that person who said, you know the truth, you're not saying anything, that day was the day I got a voice. And now I realize that that's what I was doing for other people. It took me a while to figure out that that guy is now me, and I get to be that guy all the time. So to me, that became special, and it became a missing piece for me as far as what I was doing and who I am and what my role is. Like I was meant to do this. And it took a long time to get there, but like being able to help people gain that voice back, to give other people voices, is pretty crazy. It's amazing, and I don't take it for granted at all. And every day I wake up and I'm like, don't screw this up today. Like don't do something dumb, where like this is special, and not too many people get an opportunity to do this in such a freeing way, because our format is the way a podcast is and what our days are like. You know, we have so many different things going on, but at the same time, we're our own boss. No one's telling us what to do. We have a freedom in it, even though we have a lot of work, and we work like crazy. And I work a lot, and I know you work a lot. And it's, you get a lot of unsung stuff going on of how much work you put into everything, that no one knows how much work goes into everything. But at the same time, there's this freedom that you have, which is worth it. And within that, you're helping other people become free. And it just kind of feeds in this cycle. Now I'm getting all like woo-woo world on you, but I went from being a pessimist to slowly learning how to be an optimist. And when that happens, you know, things open up, and you put yourself out there and things open up, and you know, creates little building blocks. And that's part of the show as well, like self-discovery. People discover, and you're in a cult, you don't know who you are. A lot of times, if you were born into it, you have no idea what's going on. You leave it, you're trying to find out who you are, what your identity is. And you know, that's part of what we do. We're trying to help you figure out, like, where do you even begin if you're in those situations. We've had episodes where, specifically the religious stuff, where you are in these bubbles. We have this one crazy episode named, person named Shiloh. I don't know how they're still standing. I don't know how they're not in a mental hospital, but they were had a narcissistic mom, and then they got married to someone who was an abuser, all very religious. The mom was still involved in the life, like still there. This person that she married, he was like the runt of his family, and he had an abusive older brother, so he was still abusive, but he was like on the lower level of him. So the brother was involved. The mom was also talking to that guy's brother. It was a circular thing. And then when she went to go get help, they told her who to go to this therapist to go see. So she's been living in this religious bubble for so long of what she thinks is reality. Now she's talking to this therapist, and this therapist is telling her one thing. You know, you have to do this, you have to do that. What she didn't know is that person wasn't even a therapist. It was just someone that they got from the church to pretend that they were. So for her whole entire life, she's lived in this thing of what everyone is telling her is true. And then you're leave and you're out of it. And this was with religious stuff. And now you're going into a world where that isn't reality. Who do you trust? Who can you trust? I don't know how you do that after being in that for 35 years. How? Like, it would, my mind would explode. I would be standoffish with everyone. I don't know how you can live after that, being in a twilight zone like that. But this person was doing well. which really blew my mind. I'll say that a lot, but it was a testament to that person's psyche that they were able to stay strong. Obviously, they're going to have to go through a lot of therapy, but you see it all the time, probably talking to people, that it is, it's a mind trip.
That is the end of part 1 of this conversation. For links to Brandon's show, The Narcissist Apocalypse, please follow the link in the episode description. For early access to ad-free full-length episodes of The Cult Vault, you can visit patreon.com/The Cult Vault. To get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram @cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of The Cult Vault podcast.